With nothing but mounting debts and a condemned irrigation system, Sarah Mitchell makes one final desperate attempt to save 4 generations of farming legacy, digging deeper into the parched earth that had sustained her ancestors for over a century. What she doesn't realize is that 20 feet below her desperate pickaxe swings lies not water, but a meteorite fragment worth $50 million. A literal piece of cosmic history NASA has been searching for decades. As space scientist Dr. Nathan Ellis helps authenticate her accidental discovery, Sarah finds herself caught between instant wealth and revealing a secret government project that has been hiding in plain sight across Silvercrest Valley for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 6th month of drought had turned Willow Creek Farm into a landscape that resembled the surface of Mars more than the fertile valley it had once been. The irrigation ditches that Sarah Mitchell's great-grandmother had designed stood empty, their cracked beds a testament to the severity of the water shortage plaguing Silvercrest Valley. Sarah stood at the edge of what should have been her best cornfield, boots sinking into soil that had once been rich and giving, but now crumbled like ash beneath her weight. At 38, she had weathered challenging seasons before, but nothing like this. Her weathered face had settled into lines of worry. Her strong shoulders, built through decades of physical labor, now stooped with the weight of impending failure. "It's not looking good, Bella," she said to the aging Australian shepherd at her heels. The dog whined softly, pressing against her leg as they walked toward the ancient stone well that had been the farm's primary water source since 1892. The Mitchell family had survived the Dust Bowl, weathered the farm crisis of the 1980s, and adapted to changing markets for generations. But this drought, combined with 3 consecutive years of falling crop prices, had pushed Willow Creek Farm to the brink of collapse. Sarah lifted the wooden cover off the well and dropped a weighted line into its depths. The sound of the weight hitting bottom came much sooner than it should have. She pulled the line back up, noting the barely damp end with a grimace. "Damn near bone dry," she muttered. The county inspector's report had been delivered yesterday, condemning the well as depleted beyond recovery and recommending Sarah connect to the municipal water system, a $45,000 expense she couldn't begin to afford with Western Prairie Bank already threatening foreclosure. 200 acres of corn and soybeans had withered under the relentless sun, reducing her projected income to barely 15% of normal. Her last working tractor needed repairs she'd been putting off for months, and the property taxes were already 45 days overdue. Sarah squinted toward the modest 2-story farmhouse where 3 generations of Mitchells had been born and raised. The blue paint was peeling, the porch sagging in one corner. Her father had planted maples along the front walk before heart disease took him 3 years ago. They had died within weeks of the drought's onset, as if in sympathy with the failing farm. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Sarah turned to see a cloud of dust trailing behind a silver sedan bearing the logo of Western Prairie Bank. Jennifer Zhao had been the regional loan officer for Western Prairie for nearly 12 years. She knew every farmer in the county by name and could recite their crop rotations from memory. Her mother had been an immigrant farm worker who eventually saved enough to buy her own small orchard, giving her a deeper understanding of agricultural struggles than most bankers. Today, her normally friendly expression was replaced with professional detachment as she approached Sarah. "I wish this was just a social call," Jennifer said, extending her hand. "Final notice?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Jennifer handed her an envelope. 60 days, Sarah. That's all the extension I could get you. Corporate's breathing down my neck about non-performing loans in the region. She took the envelope without opening it. "Thanks for trying, Jennifer. I know you went to bat for me." The banker glanced at the dry well, then back to her. Have you considered Donovan's offer? Sarah's jaw tightened. Richard Donovan, the director of the Silvercrest Valley Observatory and the county's largest landowner, had been making increasingly aggressive offers to buy Willow Creek Farm for the past year. His latest offer was 3 times the property's market value, a premium that made Sarah suspicious of the man's motives. "I'm not selling to Donovan," she said flatly. "Not while I still have options." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, I understand the farm's been in your family for generations, but at some point you have to face reality." "Without water, I'll find water," she interrupted. "There's an underground stream on this property my great-grandmother documented. In her journals, the well just isn't deep enough anymore." Jennifer sighed, clearly having heard similar desperate theories from other farmers facing foreclosure. "Just don't wait too long to consider alternatives. Donovan's offer won't stay on the table indefinitely." After Jennifer left, Sarah stood motionless beside the well, the bank notice crumpled in her fist. Bella pressed against her leg, offering silent comfort. That evening, after reviewing the farm's finances and finding no path to solvency through conventional means, Sarah climbed to the attic of the farmhouse. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight as she made her way to an old sea chest tucked beneath the eaves. The chest had belonged to her great-grandmother Eleanor Mitchell, who had claimed this land in 1892 after working as a geologist in Colorado. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Family legend held that Eleanor had used scientific methods unusual for farmers of that era to locate water when neighboring homesteaders had failed to find sustainable sources. Sarah lifted the heavy lid, revealing neatly stacked leather-bound journals, surveying tools, and geological specimens carefully labeled in faded handwriting. She hadn't examined these materials since inheriting the farm from her father, viewing them more as family heirlooms than practical resources. The earliest journal, dated 1892, detailed Eleanor's methodical search for water. May 12, 1892. "I have observed the morning mist patterns for 3 months, and am convinced a significant underground water source runs beneath the eastern meadow." The local Pawnee spoke of a stream that runs beneath the earth here, carrying not just water but spirits of abundance. White settlers dismiss such tales, but I have found indigenous knowledge of land and water to be superior to our own in many respects. Sarah flipped forward, looking for specific details about the well's construction. June 24, 1892. "Struck water today at 28 feet. The flow is strong beyond my highest hopes. Curiously, there appears to be unusual dark stones, occasionally mixed with the water. They have strange markings and an unusual density. I have collected samples, but am primarily grateful for the abundant water." The description caught Sarah's attention. Unusual dark stones with strange markings? She continued reading. July 7, 1892. Professor Williams from the university identified the dark stones as likely meteoritic in origin. Apparently, they may hold scientific value. He advised me to collect any additional specimens I might find. The water itself is pure and plentiful. July 18, 1892. Mr. Donovan visited today, expressing unusual interest in purchasing the eastern section of my claim, offered twice the going rate. When I declined, suggesting the entire homestead was not for sale, his manner turned cold. Mentioned that water rights in the territory remain legally ambiguous and that I would be wise to accept his generosity. Sarah sat back against a roof beam, her mind racing. Meteoritic stones? And Donovan had shown interest in the property even then. Could there still be meteorite fragments beneath the property? And if so, did that explain Richard Donovan's unusually generous offers, a continuation of his ancestors' interest? The possibility gave Sarah a renewed sense of purpose. If she could find evidence of meteorites on her property, she might be able to secure a different kind of loan. or at least negotiate with Donovan from a position of knowledge rather than desperation. The next morning, Sarah began preparations to deepen the well. Without funds to hire a professional drilling team, she would have to rely on muscle power and determination, just as her great-grandmother had done. She gathered old mining tools from the barn: pickaxes, shovels, and a hand-operated winch system her grandfather had used for well maintenance decades ago. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah secured ropes around the well's edge and lowered herself into its cool depths. The stone walls were a testament to her great-grandmother's craftsmanship, each rock perfectly fitted against its neighbors without mortar, creating a structure that had lasted more than a century. At the bottom, barely 6 inches of muddy water remained where once a constant flow had bubbled up from below. Sarah set her lantern on a small ledge and began to dig, each strike of her pickaxe against the compacted earth echoing up the stone cylinder. She didn't notice the black SUV that had parked on the county road, its occupant observing her activities through high-powered binoculars, or the urgent phone call being made to the Silvercrest Observatory's administrative offices. For 3 days, Sarah worked from dawn until dusk, stopping only when light failed completely. The well's depth increased foot by painstaking foot. The excavated soil hauled up in buckets and spread across her parched fields. Each evening, she would collapse into her father's old armchair, muscles aching, hands blistered despite her work, gloves, and read more from Eleanor's journals for guidance. On the 4th day, as Sarah's pickaxe struck the compacted earth at what she estimated to be 42 feet below the surface, something changed. The soil's consistency shifted from dry clay to a strange gravelly material. A few more strikes and her tool hit something solid that produced a distinctly metallic sound. "What the hell?" she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. She enlarged the opening, expecting to find a layer of bedrock or perhaps the underground stream Eleanor had documented. Instead, her pickaxe revealed something dark, dense, and unlike any natural stone she'd ever encountered. As she cleared away more soil, she saw it was roughly the size of a basketball, with a distinctly metallic sheen and unusual surface patterns that resembled thumbprints pressed into clay. "Not water," she whispered, running her hand over the strange object. It was cool to the touch despite the surrounding earth's warmth, and heavier than it should be when she attempted to lift it. Sarah stared at the object, her mind racing through the implications, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed until this moment. Eleanor's journal entries about the dark stones with strange markings. Richard Donovan's persistent interest in buying the property. The unusually generous offers. This wasn't about water rights or prime agricultural land. It was about what lay beneath. Using her phone, she recorded video of the discovery, narrating the date, time, and approximate depth. "Bella," she called, up to the dog who had remained a faithful sentinel at the well's edge. "We've got something better than water, girl." That evening, Sarah pored over Eleanor's journals with new understanding, finding entries she'd previously skimmed. August 6, 1892. Mr. Donovan returned today with a man he introduced as a scientific expert. They asked pointed questions about soil composition and any unusual stones I might have found. When I mentioned the meteoritic specimens, their manner changed noticeably. The expert requested samples, claiming scientific curiosity. One provided. One small piece, though their interest seems excessive. August 22, 1892. Disturbing visit from Sheriff Wilson today. Claims there have been complaints about potential water contamination from my well-affecting downstream properties, all owned by Donovan interests. Demanded I cease using the well pending investigation. When I requested documentation of these complaints, he became hostile. I have no choice but to comply temporarily, though I suspect underhanded tactics. September 8, 1892. Received official notice that new territorial regulations prohibit private wells within 500 yards of geological research areas, a category suddenly applied to the ridge at my property's edge. The notice cites potential interference with scientific observations and is signed by Judge Porter, a known associate of Mr. Donovan. The timing and specificity of this regulation cannot be coincidence. September 30th, 1892. Made a troubling discovery today while in town for supplies. Overheard conversation between Donovan and unknown government officials discussing meteorite specimens and securing access rights in the county. When they noticed my presence, conversation ceased abruptly. I am now convinced my discovery has greater significance than I realized. Sarah leaned back in her chair, pieces falling into place. Her great-grandmother had unknowingly discovered meteorite fragments, and the Donovans had attempted to force her off her land to claim them. When that failed, they'd used their political influence to restrict her water use, a pattern that seemed to be repeating itself over a century later. But why were these meteorites so important? What made them valuable enough that the Donovans would pursue them for generations? Sleep eluded Sarah that night as she considered her options. By law, she owned anything found on her property, including meteorites. But the size and apparent rarity of this specimen suggested she needed expert confirmation and documentation before proceeding. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. Before going public with her discovery, she needed expert confirmation and documentation that couldn't be easily dismissed or buried in bureaucracy. She needed someone knowledgeable about meteorites, but not connected to local interests. Her search led her to Dr. Nathan Ellis, an associate professor of meteoritics and planetary science at the State University and an independent consultant whose published papers frequently criticize the secrecy surrounding certain meteorite classifications. His reputation for scientific integrity made him the perfect ally for her situation. Sarah composed a careful email, including some of her video documentation, but withholding specific location details. She requested a confidential consultation, offering to pay his standard fee despite her financial situation. To her surprise, Dr. Ellis responded within hours. Miss Mitchell, your discovery appears significant from the limited data provided. The surface patterning suggests a rare type of iron meteorite, possibly with unique compositional elements. This could be scientifically valuable and potentially financially valuable as well. I'm intrigued professionally and happen to be in your state for a conference this week. I can make time for a site visit tomorrow if that suits. And please don't worry about the fee. This is scientifically interesting enough to warrant my time. Nathan Ellis, Ph.D. When Dr. Ellis arrived the following day, Sarah was struck by how different he was from her mental image of a space scientist. She'd expected someone older, perhaps more academic in appearance. Instead, Nathan Ellis was in his mid-30s, dressed practically in hiking boots, jeans, and a worn university sweatshirt. His dark curly hair was slightly windblown, and wire-rimmed glasses framed intelligent eyes that lit up with excitement. When she described her discovery, "Miss Mitchell," he greeted her, extending a hand that was strong and calloused from fieldwork. "Thank you for reaching out. Your discovery could be quite significant if it's what I suspect." "Just Sarah, please," she replied, shaking his hand. "And I appreciate your discretion. The situation is complicated. In my experience, when rare meteorites are involved, it always is," he said with a knowing smile. "Show me what you found." Sarah led him to the well, explaining her great-grandmother's original discovery and the recent drought that had prompted her deeper excavation. As they walked, she noticed a tenseness in his posture when she mentioned the Silvercrest Observatory and the Donovan family. "You're familiar with them?" she asked. Nathan's expression hardened slightly. "I've had professional disagreements with Silvercrest. 2 years ago, I published research requesting more open access to meteorite samples found in this region. They blocked my requests rather aggressively, citing national security protocols, for what should have been routine. Scientific specimens. He shrugged. Standard institutional tactics when they're protecting something valuable or significant. At the well, Sarah lowered specialized equipment Nathan had brought, allowing them to examine the meteorite without descending. The feed displayed on his tablet showed the dark object still partially embedded in the earth. "This is remarkable," he murmured, eyes fixed on the screen. "Based on the surface patterning and what I can see of the composition, you've found what appears to be a fragment of the Silvercrest meteorite, one of the most scientifically significant meteorite falls in North American history." He glanced up at her. "Sarah, do you understand what this means?" She shook her head. "I know meteorites can be valuable to collectors, but this isn't just any meteorite." Nathan interrupted, his excitement barely contained. "The Silvercrest meteorite fell in 1872 and was documented by astronomers at the time. But unlike most meteorite falls where fragments are collected, cataloged, and studied, nearly all of the Silvercrest fragments disappeared. There are rumors that they contained unusual isotopic ratios and potentially even evidence of complex carbon compounds, precursors to life. He tapped some calculations into his tablet. The few documented fragments that exist in museums are considered priceless for their scientific value. A specimen this size, if it's what I think it is, would be worth millions, potentially $50 million or more to the right institutions. And NASA has been quietly looking for additional specimens for decades. The figure was so large it seemed abstract to Sarah, impossible to reconcile with her immediate reality of overdue bills and foreclosure notices. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Legally, you should file a mineral rights claim with the State Geological Survey," Nathan said. "That would protect your ownership while proper assessment is conducted." He hesitated. "But given what you've told me about the Donovans and their local influence, that might alert them before you're prepared to deal with the pressure they'll apply." Sarah appreciated his understanding of the delicate situation. "What would you recommend?" "Ms. Mitchell," Jennifer began, her professional demeanor strained. "This is Director Catherine Ward from the Department of Energy's Special Resources Division. She has some urgent concerns regarding your property." Director Ward didn't wait for pleasantries. "Ms. Mitchell, we have reliable information that you've discovered materials that may fall under the Strategic Scientific Resources Act. I have authorization to secure these materials immediately." She produced official-looking documents. "This order requires you to cease any excavation activities and grant federal access to the site in question. Compliance is mandatory." Nathan stepped forward, examining the documents carefully. "Interesting timing, Director Ward. These were issued yesterday afternoon, shortly after Dr. Kapoor at NASA was contacted about this discovery. The coordination seems remarkably efficient." Ward's expression remained impassive. "Different agencies have different protocols. Dr. Ellis, the Department of Energy has primary jurisdiction over materials with potential applications to national security." "And your connection to Silvercrest Observatory?" Sarah asked directly. A flicker of surprise crossed Ward's face before she regained her composure. "The observatory is a registered research partner on certain classified projects. Their expertise is relevant to this matter." "As is NASA's," Nathan countered. "Dr. Kapoor's team has authorization to conduct the initial scientific assessment of this discovery. They'll be arriving shortly." Ward's eyes narrowed. "This is not an academic dispute, Dr. Ellis. The order is clear and legally binding." Sarah, who had been silently assessing the situation, finally spoke. "What happens to my property rights under this order, Director Ward? Does the government intend to compensate me for what's essentially seizure of valuable assets?" "Standard procedures for fair compensation would apply," Ward replied smoothly, "though assessment of value would require extensive testing and validation." Testing that would conveniently extend beyond my foreclosure deadline, Sarah noted, at which point Silvercrest Observatory, your research partner, would acquire the property through the bank, making any compensation negotiations moot. Her directness caught Ward off guard, confirming Sarah's suspicion that the federal involvement was at least partially orchestrated by Donovan to circumvent her ownership rights. That's quite an accusation, Ward recovered. Your financial arrangements with local institutions are separate from federal scientific interests. Are they? Sarah produced Eleanor's journal and the 1893 survey map. My great-grandmother documented a century of coordination between the Donovans and various government entities to acquire these meteorite fragments. The tactics have evolved, but the strategy remains consistent. The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of 3 unmarked vans. Dr. Layla Kapoor emerged from the lead vehicle, a petite woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to navigating both scientific and bureaucratic challenges. Catherine, she greeted Director Ward with cool familiarity. I didn't expect to see the dough here, especially since the Presidential Science Advisor assigned NASA primary assessment authority on this discovery just this morning. She handed Ward a document bearing the Executive Office seal. Signed an hour ago. Meteoritic materials with potential astrobiological significance fall under NASA's research domain per Directive 20E. Ward scanned the document, her expression darkening. This doesn't override national security protocols. No, but it establishes procedural sequence, Kapoor replied evenly. NASA conducts initial assessment, then coordinates with relevant agencies including DOA's standard interagency procedure, Catherine. The exchange revealed a deeper conflict between the agencies than Sarah had anticipated, and potentially an unexpected advantage. If federal authorities were divided in their approach, it created space for her to assert her rights more effectively. Dr. Kapoor, Sarah interjected, as the legal owner of this property and the materials in question, I'm willing to grant NASA access for scientific assessment, provided my ownership rights are explicitly acknowledged and I'm included in all findings and decisions. Kapoor nodded approvingly. Those terms align with NASA's standard protocols for private property discoveries. Ms. Mitchell, we recognize your legal claim and seek collaborative research access, not acquisition without consent. Ward's frustration was evident, but the NASA authorization temporarily outranked her jurisdiction. This matter isn't resolved, she stated tersely. The DOE will be monitoring the assessment process closely. After Ward departed, Kapoor turned to Sarah with a genuine smile. That woman has been trying to claim exclusive jurisdiction over meteoritic materials since the Clinton administration. Your discovery has reignited an interagency rivalry that's been simmering for decades. Because of the potential military applications? Nathan asked. Kapoor's expression turned serious. Partially, but it's more complex than that. The Silvercrest meteorite has unique properties that multiple agencies have been investigating through various classified programs. The Donovans have been private contractors facilitating that research since the 1950s, but always with limited materials. She gestured toward the well. A fragment this size, with potentially intact internal structures, is a game-changer scientifically. It could finally answer questions about the meteorite's unusual isotopic composition and possible biological markers. Biological markers? Sarah echoed. You mean evidence of extraterrestrial organic compounds, Kapoor confirmed. Nothing as dramatic as alien life forms, but possibly complex carbon structures that formed in space rather than on Earth. The scientific implications are enormous. As NASA technicians began unloading specialized equipment, Sarah led Kapoor to the well. The team worked methodically, using ground-penetrating radar to map the meteorite's position and size without disturbing it, then deploying sensitive instruments to analyze its composition remotely. By late afternoon, the preliminary assessment confirmed Nathan's initial findings and revealed even more significant details. "It's definitely part of the Silvercrest meteorite," Kapoor announced, reviewing the data on her specialized tablet. "And it appears to be the largest intact fragment ever documented. Approximately 340 pounds of extraterrestrial material, with the core structure largely preserved." She showed Sarah the three-dimensional image they'd constructed. "The surface patterning is consistent with controlled atmospheric entry. This wasn't random space debris. It was designed to survive impact." "Designed?" Sarah struggled to comprehend the implication. "You're saying it's artificial?" "We're saying its composition and structure suggest intentional engineering at some level," Kapoor clarified. "Which is why various agencies have been quietly studying the Silvercrest fragments for decades. This discovery could potentially answer whether the engineering was human or something else." The revelation stunned Sarah into silence. What had begun as a desperate search for water had uncovered something with profound implications for human understanding of our place in the universe. Nathan, who had been conferring with other scientists on the team, joined them with additional news. "The market value assessment is complete. Based on comparable sales of significantly smaller fragments and accounting for this specimen's superior preservation, conservative estimates place its value between $45 to $55 million. The figure was so large it seemed abstract to Sarah impossibly, disconnected from her immediate reality of overdue loan payments and failing crops. "What happens now?" she asked, struggling to process both the scientific and financial implications of what lay beneath her land. "That depends partly on you," Kapoor replied. "NASA would like to propose a formal research partnership. We'd establish a secure research facility here on your property, providing immediate funding for site development and ongoing compensation for research access. You'd retain ownership while participating in one of the most significant scientific investigations of the century." The offer represented everything Sarah had hoped for: financial salvation for her farm and meaningful contribution to scientific knowledge. But experience had taught her to be cautious about arrangements that seemed too perfect. "And the Donovans? The do?" she asked. "They won't simply accept NASA's jurisdiction." "No, they won't," Kapoor acknowledged. "Which is why we need to move quickly to establish your legal position and secure scientific consensus on NASA's approach. The meteorite's potential biological significance gives us leverage in the interagency dispute, but Donovan's political connections remain powerful." As they discussed next steps, Sarah noticed Jennifer Zhao lingering near her car, clearly conflicted about leaving with Director Ward. On impulse, Sarah approached the banker. "You didn't know the full story, did you?" she asked quietly. "About what Donovan was really after?" Jennifer's professional composure cracked slightly. "I knew he wanted your property for the observatory. I didn't know why, or that he was using my brother's gambling debts to pressure me into targeting your loan specifically." Her admission confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Jennifer was another pawn in Donovan's long game, manipulated through personal vulnerability, just as the sheriff and county officials had been. "Your brother's debts," Sarah said. "That's how Donovan controls you?" Jennifer nodded, shame evident in her expression. "Michael has a severe gambling addiction. Donovan bought his markers from a casino in Kansas City. If I didn't cooperate, they'd come after him legally. He'd lose his teaching position, possibly face criminal charges for some bad checks he wrote." The pattern was familiar from Eleanor's journals, the Donovans identifying and exploiting personal weaknesses to gain leverage over community gatekeepers. But where Eleanor had faced these tactics alone, Sarah now had allies and visibility that her great-grandmother couldn't have imagined. "What if you didn't have to cooperate anymore?" Sarah suggested. "What if your brother could get help and Donovan lost his leverage over both of you?" Hope flickered briefly in Jennifer's eyes before practicality reasserted itself. "Donovan doesn't forgive debts, and he never forgets disloyalty. My brother owes over $200,000. We don't have options. Maybe you do now, Sarah countered. This discovery changes everything, not just for me, but potentially for everyone Donovan has been manipulating. If you're willing to come forward with what you know about how he's been operating, Dr. Kapoor's team can ensure protection for both you and your brother. The banker hesitated, years of fear and compliance warring with the unexpected possibility of freedom. I'll think about it, she finally said. But Donovan's influence extends far beyond this county. He has connections in state government, federal agencies, international research consortiums. This isn't just about a meteorite, it's about decades of power and secrets. As Jennifer drove away, Sarah rejoined Nathan and Kapoor, sharing what she'd learned about Donovan's methods of control. It fits the pattern we've seen elsewhere, Kapoor confirmed. Donovan Aerospace has secured government contracts worth billions by providing exclusive research access to meteoritic materials. They've systematically acquired land with suspected fragment deposits across 3 states, often using questionable financial and legal tactics. But they've never faced public scrutiny, Nathan added. The classified nature of the research has allowed them to operate in shadows, leveraging government secrecy to hide their methods. Then perhaps it's time for some sunlight, Sarah suggested, an idea taking shape as she spoke. My great-grandmother documented everything, the pressure tactics, the regulatory manipulation, the coordinated efforts to force her off her land. I've inherited not just her property, but her meticulous record of a century of deception. Kapoor considered this thoughtfully. Historically significant documentation, combined with a discovery of this magnitude, would generate substantial media attention. Even Donovan's political connections couldn't easily suppress that kind of story. But we'd need to move quickly, Nathan cautioned. Once we go public, Donovan will use every resource at his disposal to discredit us and reassert control. Then we prepare thoroughly before making any announcements, Sarah decided. Document everything scientifically, legally secure my ownership rights, and gather testimonials from others who've experienced Donovan's tactics. As the NASA team continued their assessment, setting up secure perimeters and sophisticated monitoring equipment around the well, Sarah felt a growing sense of purpose that transcended her initial goal of saving the farm. This wasn't just about her property or even the valuable meteorite beneath it. It was about challenging a system of influence and intimidation that had shaped her community for generations. That evening, while the NASA security team maintained watch over the well site, Sarah, Nathan, and Kapoor gathered in the farmhouse kitchen to develop their strategy. The worn oak table where 4 generations of Mitchells had shared meals now served as the planning center for what was evolving into a coordinated resistance against the Donovan legacy. The scientific authentication is our foundation, Kapoor explained, organizing her notes with methodical precision. NASA's official verification of the meteorite's significance establishes both its scientific value and your legal claim as the property owner. Nathan added, the historical documentation from Eleanor's journals provides context that transforms this from a simple property dispute into a compelling narrative about generational justice and scientific integrity. Sarah nodded, feeling a connection to her great-grandmother that transcended time. 2 women, separated by a century, but united in their determination to stand against those who believed wealth and influence entitled them to whatever they desired. What about the community impact? She asked. This isn't just about my farm or this meteorite. The Donovans have been shaping this county through intimidation and manipulation for generations. Countless families have lost land, businesses, opportunities because they stood in the way of Donovan interests. That's our third pillar, Kapoor agreed. Scientific authentication, historical documentation, and community testimony. Together, they create a narrative powerful enough to withstand even Donovan's influence. As they refined their approach, Sarah realized that her perspective had fundamentally shifted. Days ago, she had been digging desperately for water, focused solely on saving her family legacy from foreclosure. Now she was engaged in something much larger, a chance to transform not just her own circumstances, but the power dynamics that had constrained her community for generations. The ancient well that had run dry had led her to dig deeper, both literally and metaphorically, beyond immediate crisis to historical understanding, beyond personal survival to community justice, beyond accepted limitations to previously unimagined possibilities. Eleanor Mitchell had fought to protect what was rightfully hers against powerful interests who believed their wealth entitled them to take whatever they wanted. Sarah was continuing that fight, but with an expanded vision, not just defending individual rights but advancing collective welfare, not just preserving agricultural heritage, but connecting it to humanity's cosmic origins. As they worked into the night, the farmhouse glowing like a beacon in the darkness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since before the drought began. Hope, not just for her own future, but for something more profound, a rebalancing of power that could benefit many beyond herself. The path ahead remained challenging and uncertain. Donovan's resources were vast, his connections deeply embedded in systems of government and finance. The legal, scientific, and public opinion battles would require all their ingenuity and determination to navigate successfully. But for the first time since the well had run dry, Sarah felt equal to the challenge. The meteorite discovered beneath the ancient well offered not just financial salvation, but an opportunity to honor her heritage while serving a greater purpose, to transform a resource that had been a source of conflict into a foundation for scientific advancement and community renewal. As she, Nathan, and Kapoor finalized their strategy for the coming days, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had found both the right cause and the right allies to face them. Together, they would write a new chapter in the long story of Willow Creek Farm, one that might finally resolve the century-old conflict between the Mitchells and the Donovans, not through surrender or defeat, but through a vision of scientific integrity and shared benefit that neither family had previously imagined. The ancient well had indeed run dry, but what Sarah had discovered by digging deeper was far more precious than water, a connection to both Earth's past and humanity's future that would transform not just her life, but countless others in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. The following week unfolded with the intensity of a gathering storm. Dr. Kapoor's NASA team transformed Sarah's dining room into a high-tech command center filled with specialized equipment, digital screens, and secure communication systems. Scientists in rotating shifts conducted continuous analysis of the meteorite, each new finding more extraordinary than the last. The isotopic composition is unlike anything in our catalog database, Dr. Kapoor explained during their morning briefing, her usual scientific reserve giving way to barely contained excitement. The fragment contains elements that shouldn't be stable in our universe's conditions, yet they've maintained integrity for potentially millions of years. Nathan, who had officially taken leave from his university position to serve as liaison between NASA and Sarah, pointed to the three-dimensional holographic model hovering above the central table. The internal structure shows evidence of engineered lattice patterns at the molecular level. Natural formation couldn't produce this level of symmetry and repetition. Sarah tried to absorb the implications of what they were discovering beneath her family's land, so it's definitely not natural. It was created by something intelligent. The evidence increasingly supports that conclusion, Kapoor confirmed. Though whether it was created by a non-Earth civilization or represents technology from our own distant future that somehow traveled back in time, both remain theoretical possibilities we're investigating. The scientific revelations continued to accumulate, but equally important was the community transformation occurring around Willow Creek Farm. What had begun as a small group of neighbors protecting the well site had evolved into a coordinated network of local resistance against Donovan influence. Jennifer Zhao had made her decision, approaching Sarah on the third day with a flash drive containing years of documentation about Donovan's manipulation of the banking system. He used the bank to target specific properties for acquisition. She explained, her professional demeanor giving way to evident relief at finally speaking the truth. Properties with suspected meteorite fragments, or those blocking his access to potential sites. Western Prairie foreclosed on 17 farms. In the past decade, all subsequently purchased by Donovan-controlled entities. Her brother Mikkel, a mathematics professor at the community college, had also come forward, detailing how Donovan operatives had deliberately drawn him into high-stakes gambling situations and then purchased his debts to gain leverage over his sister. His testimony revealed a pattern of Donovan's organization, specifically targeting individuals with access to financial, regulatory, or political systems. Others followed, the county water commissioner who admitted to falsifying drought reports to pressure specific farmers. A former Silvercrest Observatory security officer who had participated in surveillance of properties with suspected meteorite deposits, even Sheriff Taylor, who confessed that his department selectively enforced ordinances based on lists provided by Donovan's legal team. Sarah had installed a large map of Silvercrest County on the barn wall, tracking each new testimony with colored pins that revealed the comprehensive nature of Donovan's influence: red for financial pressure, blue for regulatory manipulation, green for personal coercion. The resulting pattern showed not random opportunism, but a carefully orchestrated, multi-generational strategy to control the region's meteorite deposits. "It's extraordinary," Nathan remarked, studying the map with Sarah. "Your great-grandmother documented the beginning of this system in her journals, but even she couldn't have imagined how sophisticated it would become. Or how fragile," Sarah replied. All this influence depended on secrecy and isolation, each person thinking they were the only one being manipulated, too ashamed or afraid to speak out. Once people started sharing their experiences, the whole system began unraveling. The momentum shifted further when Rachel Winding River, a Pawnee elder whose ancestors had originally inhabited the region, arrived at the farm with her grandson, Dr. Thomas Winding River, an astrophysicist from Caltech. "Our oral traditions speak of sky stones that fell to earth in the time before," Rachel explained as they sat in Sarah's kitchen, "stones that sang with voices not of this world. The places where they landed were considered sacred sites, portals, between realms that our medicine people would visit for wisdom and healing." Her grandson added, "When I was completing my doctoral work on theoretical astrochemistry, I began to wonder if these stories might reference actual meteorite falls with unusual properties. The descriptions in our traditional knowledge align remarkably well with the scientific anomalies you're documenting in the Silvercrest meteorite." Their contribution added cultural and historical dimensions to the developing narrative, connecting indigenous knowledge with cutting-edge science in ways that further legitimized the significance of Sarah's discovery. Donovan's response was predictably aggressive. First came legal challenges, cease and desist orders citing obscure regulations, property line disputes based on century-old survey discrepancies, environmental impact concerns suddenly discovered by county officials. When these failed to gain traction against NASA's federal authority and the growing public awareness, Donovan escalated to media manipulation. Articles appeared in regional publications, questioning the scientific validity of the discovery, suggesting Sarah was exaggerating its significance for financial gain, implying that NASA's involvement was wasteful government overreach. But these tactics, so effective in the past when deployed against isolated individuals, faltered against the coordinated resistance Sarah and her allies had built. Each legal challenge was met with documented evidence of similar maneuvers against Eleanor Mitchell and other landowners over decades. Media attempts to discredit the discovery were countered with peer-reviewed scientific assessments from NASA and independent universities. On the 10th day after the discovery, as they finalized preparations for a formal press conference that would bring national attention to both the meteorite and Donovan's century of manipulation, Sarah received an unexpected call from Richard Donovan himself. "Ms. Mitchell," his voice carried the strained courtesy of someone unaccustomed to negotiating from a position of weakness. "I believe we should discuss resolution options before this situation escalates further." Sarah put the call on speaker so Nathan and Kapoor could hear. "I'm listening, Mr. Donovan. I'm prepared to offer you $50 million for your property and all rights to the meteorite fragment. That's substantially above even the most optimistic valuation. You would be free to relocate anywhere, financial concerns permanently resolved." The directness of the offer was surprising. No pretense about scientific interest or observatory expansion, just a straightforward attempt to buy what he had failed to obtain through manipulation. "That's a generous offer," Sarah replied carefully. "But I believe you misunderstand my position. This isn't just about financial compensation." "Then name your price," Donovan countered, impatience edging into his tone. "Everyone has one. Your great-grandmother had her principles, and they cost her family decades of financial struggle. Don't repeat her mistake." Sarah felt a surge of indignation at his dismissal of Eleanor's stand against exploitation. "My great-grandmother protected something more valuable than money, Mr. Donovan. She protected her integrity and the right to determine her own destiny. I intend to honor that legacy." "Integrity doesn't pay property taxes," Donovan scoffed. "I'm offering you financial security for generations. What are you gaining by fighting me?" Sarah considered the question seriously, not as a negotiating tactic, but as an opportunity to articulate what had become increasingly clear to her over the past days. "I'm gaining the chance to transform something that your family has treated as a private resource into a source of knowledge that benefits humanity," she said finally. "This meteorite isn't just a valuable object. It potentially changes our understanding of our place in the universe. That knowledge shouldn't be controlled by one family or corporation. It should be developed transparently, with proper scientific protocols and public oversight." The silence that followed suggested her answer had genuinely surprised Donovan. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from condescension to something approaching respect. "You sound remarkably like my grandfather's descriptions of Eleanor Mitchell," he said. He considered her his most formidable opponent, stubborn but principled. "I see that quality persists genetically, as does your family's persistence in trying to control what isn't rightfully yours," Sarah countered. "Rightful ownership is a complex concept when dealing with objects not of terrestrial origin," Donovan replied. "But I recognize that our traditional approaches won't resolve this situation. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Mitchell?" Sarah glanced at Kapoor, who nodded encouragement. "A collaborative research initiative with 3 key principles. First, I retain ownership of my property and the meteorite, with NASA establishing a permanent research facility here. Second, scientific findings are published openly, benefiting the entire scientific community rather than proprietary interests. Third, a trust is established to benefit those in the community who have been harmed by your family's tactics over the generations." "That's not a business proposition," Donovan objected. "It's a surrender of valuable research we've pursued for generations. It's an opportunity to transform an adversarial relationship into a collaborative one," Sarah corrected. "Silvercrest Observatory could be a legitimate research partner in the initiative, with appropriate protocols and oversight. Your scientists could continue their work, but within an ethical framework that benefits many rather than enriching few." Another lengthy silence followed as Donovan apparently considered her proposal. "My father would dismiss this outright," he finally said. He believed absolute control was the only acceptable outcome. But I've spent decades watching the scientific potential of the Silvercrest meteorite remain largely untapped because of the secrecy constraints. His admission revealed a potential fracture in the Donovan approach that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Recognition that their pursuit of control had limited the very scientific advancement they claimed to value. Perhaps it's time for a different approach, she suggested. One that honors both the scientific significance of the discovery and the community that has been affected by its presence. I'll need to consider the implications, Donovan said, his customary decisiveness notably absent. This represents a fundamental shift in strategy that requires careful evaluation. After ending the call, Sarah turned to Kapoor and Nathan. Do you think there's any chance he's genuinely considering our approach? It's possible, Kapoor replied thoughtfully. Donovan Aerospace has been losing government contracts to more innovative competitors for years. Their insistence on proprietary control of meteoritic research has become increasingly disadvantageous as collaborative scientific models demonstrate superior results. He may recognize that adaptation is necessary for survival. Nathan was less optimistic. Or he's stalling while developing a more aggressive countermove. We should proceed with the press conference as planned, establishing public awareness. That can't be easily reversed. The press conference, held the following day on the grounds of Willow Creek Farm, drew media attention far beyond their expectations. National science correspondents mingled with local reporters. International research institutions sent representatives, and even several elected officials appeared, sensing the political significance of the unfolding story. Standing at the podium, they'd set up near the ancient well, with Kapoor and Nathan flanking her. Sarah felt a momentary surge of anxiety. 4 generations of Mitchells had worked this land in relative obscurity, focusing on the essential but unglamorous work of growing food and maintaining a family legacy. Now she was about to step into a public spotlight that would transform both her life and her relationship to that legacy forever. She glanced down at Eleanor's journal, which she'd brought to the podium as both reference and talisman, drawing strength from her great-grandmother's courage across the decades. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the clarity and conviction of someone who had found purpose beyond personal benefit. Thank you all for coming to Willow Creek Farm today. What began as a desperate search for water during drought has led to a discovery with profound implications not just for science, but for how we understand resource stewardship and community responsibility. She proceeded to explain the meteorite discovery, NASA's preliminary findings, and the historical context of the Donovan family's century-long efforts to acquire the Mitchell property. Scientists from NASA presented the technical data. Community members shared testimonials about Donovan's pattern of manipulation, and legal experts outlined the implications for scientific access and property rights. The comprehensive presentation left little room for the dismissive narratives Donovan's media allies had been attempting to establish. This wasn't a simple property dispute or an exaggerated scientific claim. It was a meticulously documented case of sustained exploitation, being transformed into an opportunity for collaborative advancement. As the formal presentation concluded and reporters began shouting questions, a black helicopter appeared on the horizon, descending toward the open field adjacent to the press area. Conversations hushed as the aircraft landed and Richard Donovan emerged, accompanied by an elderly man Sarah recognized from photographs as Harold Donovan, Richard's father and the longtime head of the family empire. Their unexpected arrival created a ripple of tension through the crowd. Sarah exchanged concerned glances with Kapoor and Nathan, uncertain whether this represented a dramatic escalation or a potential breakthrough. Richard Donovan approached the microphone, his expression unreadable. Ms. Mitchell has presented a compelling narrative about my family's interest in the Silvercrest meteorite. Rather than dispute specific claims, I'd like to address the fundamental question at hand: how humanity should approach discoveries that potentially transform our understanding of our place in the universe. He gestured toward his father, who remained standing stoically by the helicopter. For 3 generations, my family has pursued a proprietary approach to meteoritic research, believing that controlled access would yield the most significant advancements. My grandfather established this strategy, my father perfected it, and I have continued it, until now. A murmur ran through the crowd at this unexpected admission. After careful consideration and extensive discussion with my father, I am announcing that Donovan Aerospace and Silvercrest Observatory will be pursuing a collaborative research model aligned with the principles Ms. Mitchell has advocated. We are proposing the establishment of the Silvercrest Scientific Cooperative, a multi-institutional research initiative that maintains private property rights while ensuring open scientific access and community benefit. The announcement stunned the audience into momentary silence before erupting into a chaos of questions and exclamations. Sarah stood immobile, trying to process this dramatic shift in Donovan's position. Nathan leaned close to her ear. This is either a genuine breakthrough or the most sophisticated counter-strategy we've seen yet. Either way, the public commitment makes it harder for them to reverse course. As the initial commotion subsided, Richard Donovan continued. The cooperative model will include provisions for compensating community members affected by our past acquisition strategies, transparent scientific protocols overseen by an independent board, and establishment of a permanent research campus here at Willow Creek Farm, with Ms. Mitchell retaining full property ownership. He turned to face Sarah directly. We're not surrendering our scientific interests, Ms. Mitchell. We're proposing to pursue them through collaboration rather than control a model that evidence suggests will yield superior results for everyone involved. The elder Donovan remained expressionless throughout his son's speech, his hands gripping his cane with whitened knuckles, a telling sign that this new approach had not come without internal conflict. In the days that followed, as legal teams hammered out the framework for the Silvercrest Scientific Cooperative, the full impact of Sarah's stand began to emerge. The meteorite fragment's scientific significance had exceeded even Dr. Kapoor's initial assessments, with preliminary analysis confirming isotopic compositions that challenged fundamental assumptions about matter formation in our universe. Equally significant was the community transformation. As Donovan's system of influence unraveled, people began speaking openly about experiences they had previously kept hidden out of shame or fear. The mapping project Sarah had started in her barn expanded into a community-wide documentation initiative, creating a comprehensive record of how concentrated power had shaped the region's development over generations. Jennifer Zhao resigned from Western Prairie Bank to establish a financial literacy program, helping farmers develop resilience against predatory lending practices. Her brother Michael created a support group for others struggling with gambling addiction, particularly those who had been deliberately targeted because of their professional positions. The most profound change, however, was in Willow Creek Farm itself. The NASA research facility, constructed with sensitivity to the agricultural landscape, blended advanced technology with environmental sustainability. The irrigation systems Sarah had been unable to repair were replaced with state-of-the-art water conservation technology that allowed crops to flourish despite continuing climate challenges. 3 months after discovering the meteorite, Sarah stood in her east field, now green with emerging corn seedlings, watching researchers coming and going from the sleek research building that had been constructed near the ancient well. The well itself had been preserved with a special glass enclosure, allowing visitors to see the meteorite fragment in its original position while protecting it from environmental damage. Nathan joined her, their relationship having evolved from professional collaboration to something deeper neither had anticipated. The preliminary findings are being published tomorrow, he said. 17 research teams from 9 countries have already submitted proposals for the next phase of analysis. And the community trust? Sarah asked, equally concerned with the human impact of their work. Fully funded and operational. The first grants for business development and educational scholarships have been approved. Jennifer estimates it will generate $4 million annually for community investment, completely independent from research operations. Sarah nodded with satisfaction, gazing across the landscape her family had tended for generations. The farm that had been weeks away from foreclosure was now not only secure but transformed into a nexus of scientific advancement and community renewal. What would Eleanor think of all this? She wondered aloud. Her well running dry but leading to something beyond anything she could have imagined. Nathan smiled, understanding her connection to that ancestral legacy. I think she'd recognize that you didn't just protect what she built, you expanded it into something greater. She dug a well for water. You turned it into a portal to the stars. The image struck Sarah as profoundly right. The ancient well had indeed run dry, forcing her to dig deeper beyond immediate crisis to historical understanding, beyond personal survival to community transformation, beyond earthbound thinking to cosmic possibility. Eleanor Mitchell had fought to protect what was rightfully hers against those who believed wealth and influence entitled them to whatever they desired. Sarah had continued that fight, but expanded its purpose and outcome, not just defending individual rights, but advancing collective knowledge, not just preserving agricultural heritage, but connecting it to humanity's cosmic origins. As evening approached, community members began arriving for the weekly gathering that had become tradition since the cooperative's formation. Farmers whose families had worked adjacent land for generations mingled with scientists from around the world. Indigenous knowledge keepers shared insights with quantum physicists, and children played near the ancient well, unaware of its pivotal role but benefiting from the opportunities it had created. Sarah watched this unlikely community with quiet pride, knowing that the crisis that had threatened everything she valued had ultimately revealed something far more precious than either water or meteorites: the capacity for transformation that occurs when desperation becomes determination, when conflict evolves into collaboration, when individual interests expand to encompass collective advancement. The well that had run dry had led her to dig deeper, both literally and figuratively, discovering not just a valuable resource but a new understanding of value itself, one measured not in personal acquisition but in shared discovery, not in control but in contribution. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save her family farm had evolved into something far more significant, a model for how humanity might approach discoveries that transcend traditional boundaries of ownership and understanding, honoring both our terrestrial roots and our cosmic connections. As she moved among her guests, Sarah caught sight of the elder Donovan observing the gathering from the edge of the property, his expression a complex mixture of resignation and curiosity. Their eyes met briefly across the distance representatives of families whose conflict had shaped a community for generations, now cautiously exploring a different kind of relationship based on collaboration rather than control. The ancient well had indeed run dry, but what had flowed from that seeming calamity was far more precious than water, a legacy of innovation, cooperation, and shared discovery that would nourish both scientific understanding and community prosperity for generations to come. 10 years after Sarah Mitchell's desperate dig into the ancient well, the transformation of Silvercrest Valley had become a case study in collaborative, scientific advancement and community revitalization. Educational institutions, research foundations, and rural development agencies from around the world sent representatives to study what had become known as the Silvercrest model of integrated scientific and community development. On a bright spring morning, Sarah stood at the edge of her cornfield, watching her 10-year-old daughter, Emma, carefully collect soil samples as part of her science project. Beside her, Nathan guided their daughter's methodical approach while their 6-year-old son Lucas attempted to mimic his sister's technique with considerably less precision, but equal enthusiasm. The organic content is way higher than it was. Before the research center was built, Emma declared with the certainty of a child raised among farmers and scientists, "The regenerative agriculture program is working." Sarah smiled at her daughter's understanding of agricultural science, a natural fusion of Mitchell farming knowledge and Ellis scientific expertise. Emma had inherited Eleanor's meticulous nature and passion for documentation, keeping careful journals of her observations around the farm that reminded Sarah powerfully of her great-great-grandmother's records. "The soil restoration program has exceeded our projections," Nathan confirmed, ruffling their son's hair as he enthusiastically dug another small hole. "The 10-year data shows significant improvement in both water retention and carbon sequestration." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small convoy of vehicles coming up the farm's main drive, the scheduled tour of International Space Agency representatives interested in the collaborative research model developed at the Silvercrest Scientific Cooperative. As chair of the cooperative's Community Integration Board, Sarah had become an unexpected ambassador for their approach, regularly hosting delegations seeking to understand how the principles might be adapted to their own scientific initiatives. "Right on time," Nathan noted, checking his watch. "Emma, would you like to show the scientists your comparative soil analysis? They'd be particularly interested in your historical data tracking." Emma's face lit up at the prospect of presenting her research to important visitors, while Lucas immediately began explaining his own project, investigating the impact of earthworms, with more enthusiasm than scientific rigor. As they walked back toward the research campus that had been established adjacent to the farmhouse, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had been transformed from that moment of crisis 10 years earlier. The desperate farmer facing foreclosure had evolved into a recognized innovator in scientific community partnership models, speaking at conferences and advising research institutions on collaborative approaches that balanced scientific advancement with community benefit. Sarah called a familiar voice as they approached the gathering officials. Dr. Leela Kapoor, now in her 70s but still serving as NASA's chief liaison to the cooperative, extended her hand in greeting. "The delegation from the European Space Agency just arrived. They're particularly interested in your community trust governance model." The visitors included science ministers from 7 countries, each facing their own challenges in balancing advanced research with community integration and benefit. As Sarah led them through the campus, she emphasized the collaborative principles that had defined their approach from the beginning. The key insight wasn't technological but philosophical, she explained as they toured the main research facility where scientists from 28 countries now worked together studying the Silvercrest meteorite and its implications, treating scientific advancement, agricultural sustainability, and community development as interconnected rather than competing priorities, created possibilities that weren't visible when each was considered in isolation. The research campus represented that integration in physical form, with laboratories dedicated to meteorite analysis adjoining agricultural research stations and community education spaces. Scientists with diverse specialties collaborated on challenges ranging from isotopic analysis to drought-resistant crop development, sharing insights across traditional disciplinary boundaries. The meteorite discovery could have been managed conventionally, Sarah continued as they observed the team using advanced imaging technology to examine the molecular structure of a recently extracted fragment. Extract maximum value quickly, create temporary prosperity for a few, and leave the community vulnerable when the resource inevitably depletes or the research funding ends. Instead, we chose to leverage it as catalytic capital for long-term integrated development. One of the ministers raised the question Sarah had heard countless times over the years. But surely this required exceptional circumstances, the specific property rights structure, your family's historical connection to the land, the particular Scientific significance of the discovery. How can others replicate this success without those unique conditions? Emma, who had been quietly listening while waiting to present her soil research, unexpectedly spoke up. My mom always says it's not about having the same circumstances, it's about applying the same principles. The adults turned to the young girl, surprised by her confident intervention. And what principles are those? The minister asked with a smile. Transparency in decision-making, fairness in sharing benefits, respect for different kinds of knowledge, and planning for 7 generations ahead instead of just the next quarter, Emma recited, clearly having absorbed these concepts through years of dinner-table conversations. Sarah couldn't have expressed it better herself. The specific circumstances of their situation, the meteorite's scientific value, the historical conflict with the Donovans, the NASA intervention had created their particular path, but the underlying principles could be adapted to various contexts and resources. As the tour continued to the community center, where visitors could interact with local residents and hear first-hand accounts of the valley's transformation, Sarah found herself walking alongside Richard Donovan, who had arrived separately for the quarterly cooperative board meeting. At 72, Donovan retained his commanding presence, though a decade of collaboration had softened the adversarial edge that had once defined his interactions. The transformation in their relationship reflected broader changes in the community, from antagonism to cautious cooperation, from zero-sum competition to recognition of mutual benefit. The Japanese Space Agency is considering adopting our open research protocols for their asteroid sample analysis, he mentioned, scanning the gathering with evident satisfaction. Their director contacted me yesterday about implementation strategies. That's the 4th major agency this year, Sarah noted. The collaborative model is becoming the new standard rather than the exception. Donovan nodded thoughtfully. My father never lived to see it, but I think even he would have recognized the superiority of this approach by now. The scientific advancements we've achieved through collaboration have far exceeded what our proprietary research produced in 50 years of isolation. His acknowledgement represented a profound shift from the Donovan family's multi-generational strategy of control and secrecy. Harold Donovan had died 3 years after the cooperative's formation, never fully reconciling himself to the new approach, but grudgingly admitting that the scientific results were surprisingly substantial. It required all of us to reconsider deeply held assumptions, Sarah acknowledged. My family's independence, your family's control, the scientific community's traditional research models. Nobody got exactly what they initially wanted, but we all gained something more valuable through compromise and collaboration. The afternoon concluded with a community dinner where visitors could interact informally with residents and hear first-hand accounts of how the cooperative had affected daily life in Silvercrest Valley. The gathering was held in what had once been an abandoned grain silo but was now a thriving community space, where local farmers, artisans, and small businesses showcased their products, alongside scientific exhibits explaining the latest research developments. Sarah observed the vibrant scene with quiet satisfaction. The county that had been steadily declining when she inherited Willow Creek Farm was now experiencing population growth, economic diversification, and cultural revitalization. Young people who would once have left for urban opportunities were finding reasons to stay or return, bringing new energy and ideas to the community. As the official delegation departed, Sarah walked with her family back toward the farmhouse, taking the longer route that passed the ancient well, now preserved as a historical monument with educational displays explaining its pivotal role in the community's transformation. Mom, tell us the well story again, Lucas asked, his fascination with the family legend undiminished despite having heard it countless times. Well, Sarah began, lifting her son onto her shoulders as they approached the glass enclosure protecting the original stone structure. It started during the worst drought anyone could remember. Our farm was dying, we had no money left, and the bank was going to take everything away. She recounted the story for her children once more, the desperate dig for water, the discovery of the meteorite instead, the conflict with the Donovans, and the ultimately transformative decision to create the scientific cooperative rather than pursue either personal enrichment or continued antagonism. "But why didn't you just keep all the money?" Lucas asked with the directness of a child. Ms. Rodriguez said in school that the meteorite was worth more than a king's treasure. Sarah exchanged a glance with Nathan, both understanding the importance of helping their children grasp the values that had shaped their decisions. "I could have," Sarah acknowledged. "But that would have been wealth just for our family." By choosing the cooperative approach, we created something much more valuable than money. "Like what?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer from previous tellings. "Like the new medical center where Lucas was born," Sarah replied. "Like your school with all its science equipment. Like the programs that help other farmers try new methods without risking everything if they don't work right away. And like how people don't have to move away to find good jobs anymore." They reached the well, its weathered stones now protected by the special enclosure that preserved it, while allowing visitors to view the historical site and the meteorite fragment, still embedded in its original position. A plaque detailed its significance, and interactive displays explained both the scientific properties of the Silvercrest meteorite and the positive displays explained both the scientific properties of the Silvercrest meteorite and the Silvercrest meteorite, and the community development model that had emerged from its discovery. Sarah lifted Lucas from her shoulders and set him down beside the enclosure, where both children peered with fascination at the dark, otherworldly object that had transformed their community. "What would have happened if you had found water instead of the meteorite?" Emma asked, posing a question she hadn't raised before. Sarah considered this thoughtfully. "We might have saved the farm, at least temporarily. But we wouldn't have had the opportunity to create something that helps so many people and advances scientific knowledge in such important ways." Sometimes, Nathan added, what seems like the worst possible outcome, a well running dry during drought, can lead to discoveries and possibilities we couldn't have imagined. As they continued their walk home in the fading light, Sarah reflected on how completely her understanding of value had transformed over the past decade. The desperate farmer who had sought only to save her family's land had discovered something far more meaningful than the meteorite itself, a vision of collaborative advancement that honored the past while creating new possibilities for the future. Eleanor Mitchell had fought to protect her land and rights against powerful interests who used their wealth and influence to take what wasn't rightfully theirs. Sarah had continued that fight but expanded its purpose, not just defending individual rights but advancing collective knowledge, not just preserving agricultural heritage but evolving it to meet new challenges, not just resisting exploitation but creating models of cooperation that transformed former adversaries into partners. The ancient well had indeed run dry, forcing her to dig deeper both literally and figuratively. What she had discovered in that moment of crisis was not just a valuable resource, but a transformative opportunity, a chance to reimagine the relationship between scientific discovery, individual rights, and community benefit in ways that had enriched them all beyond measure. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.